Legendary manga creator Akira Toriyama passed away on March 1st due to acute subdural hematoma. He was only 68. The world didn't find out though until a week later, on March 7th. Since then, scores of people, from his fans to his fellow artists and friends, have talked about how much his work meant to them. I'm sure Toriyama heard that many times before his passing, but I don't know if he truly knew the scale of it. He inspired and brought joy to so many people that it's difficult to put it into words. Few creators can say they had the impact Toriyama had. He not only revolutionized how comedy comics and action comics were told in Japan, but affected the video game industry with his contributions to Dragon Quest, but also with the humor and the tropes from his manga series Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball, and their anime adaptations. And I am definitely one of those people, so I'd like to talk about how I discovered Toriyama's work and how he inspired me. Like many older millennials, my first encounter with anime was back when it was still called Japanimation. And here in Chicago, there was a channel WJYS, Channel 62, which would air uncut anime movies like Vampire Hunter D, Street Fighter, Crimson Wolf, Ninja Scroll, and many more. I want to say that that's where I first saw Dragon Ball, specifically the DBZ OVA movies, but that may not be true. I do know that that was my proper introduction to anime. Obviously, a lot of the kid shows I watched like Voltron, Transformers, and Speed Racer came from Japan, but this was a completely different thing at the time. This was more violent, more adult, and better animation. Eventually, the Sci-Fi Channel also ran some of these movies, and I do remember watching DBZ movies on that channel, although I would usually only catch the Tree of Might. For whatever reason, I rarely got to watch Dead Zone or The World's Strongest. I love the movies because of the action and the stories, but I always felt like I was missing something because it was clear that these were spin-offs and not part of the story proper. So in came the Dragon Ball TV series, both of them. I remember Fox carrying the dub for Dragon Ball, which was only 13 episodes, so just as I would get into it, it would restart. And I don't think it aired for very long. The Dragon Ball Z show was a whole other animal. My recollection of it was that it was a sleeper hit. It was around for a while and a few people talked about it, and then it just kind of became popular among Japanimation fans. And of course, there were the ones who were in the know, who knew that the show had been heavily edited, and most importantly, went on past episode 53. Oh, infamous episode 53. How I still hate you. It wasn't the edits that made it infamous. It was that the whole series would restart because they only licensed the first 67 episodes, which they edited down to 53. It was painful every time we got to that Ginyu Force episode, because it would always reset just when it was getting good, and we'd never get to see Goku finally going Super Saiyan. This was 96, 97 into 98, so the internet was a thing, and people could look up what happened in the rest of the series, so not getting to see it made it even worse. DBZ finally wound up on Cartoon Network, and I remember all my high school friends getting excited because we hoped the show would finally go past this episode. And when that bitch restarted, the words that came out of my mouth made my landlady come down and ask me what was wrong. That next day at school, even the teachers were bitching about it. That's how into the show everyone was. And the show had a deep impact on me, especially when Funimation finally got the licensing and finished the series. I didn't care for the new Texas voice actors at all, but at least I could get uncut versions of the show. Dragon Ball Z was my thing, and it absolutely affected my stories and art. I didn't rip off Toriyama's style, but I did steal poses, and I dabbled for a while with drawing pointy shoes. Thankfully, that didn't last long. But ripping off the whole Super Saiyan thing, oh yeah, that stuck. I've got an entire race of people who can transform into more powerful versions of themselves. I don't want to deep dive into the lore, but the quick and easy version of it is I changed my characters enough so that they didn't directly rip off Saiyans anymore, but they're still pretty close. So of course, I had to make up a word for what happens when my characters go Super Saiyan, then I needed a name for the race, and I figured, why not just make up a whole language? So it was actually Dragon Ball that got me into creating constructed languages, and the backstory and the lore for the race. A couple of years later, I would discover The Lord of the Rings, watch the behind the scenes for the films, and find out that I'm not crazy. I'm not the only person who's done this. Tolkien did it too. It works, and it'd probably take me a lifetime to do what I wanted. Here I am some 30 years later, and yeah, that's pretty accurate. But that wasn't the only way Dragon Ball influenced me. I also had my own superhero comic universe, but unlike most superhero stories, my stories weren't about the heroes dealing with day-to-day crimes. Instead, they were about these major battles the characters would get into, and once that villain was stopped, weeks, months, maybe even years would pass until the next threat. And eventually, there would be an end. Not to their adventures, but just to how much of the story I wanted to tell. At the time, no American comics were told like this. They would go on forever. They had a beginning and a middle, but no end. But with Dragon Ball, it does the exact opposite. You have these major villains who shake the world, the Z-Fighters defeat them, then they go about their lives for weeks, months, or years until the next big threat comes, and then eventually, the story ends. I didn't know you could do that, and I didn't know that it would work, not until Dragon Ball. That alone made me love Akira Toriyama's work, but it wasn't until I finally read the manga that I truly appreciated Toriyama as an artist. Back in 2006, I decided to finally pick up the Dragon Ball manga. I tried reading one volume per week, but I read way too fast for that, so I started buying 4 to 5 volumes at a time. This was back when Borders was still around, and they'd have these buy 3 get 1 free deals. The problem, though, was that Borders let people read the books, so finding copies that weren't well read was tricky. Fortunately, there were about 10 Borders in the city at the time, so I could hunt down decent copies, but I ran into a problem midway through DBZ. I couldn't find volumes 22 to 27 anywhere. None of the stores had them, no Barnes & Nobles had them, no Borders had them, so I broke down and bought them online. In fact, I bought the entire rest of the series. And when I got the books, I read them all in one night. Toriyama's skill as an artist isn't spoken of enough. This man was incredibly talented. His compositions alone are worth studying. He was a master at getting your eye to go to the right spot and leading it across the page. His visual storytelling, from the action to the gags, was also impressive. You can read Dragon Ball and follow most of it without reading a single word. Toriyama also included so much acting in the panels. People are always busy, always doing something that lets you know what they're thinking or scheming or planning. Then there's a rhythm of the pacing of the panels. There's this underlying timing where you know your eye needs to linger on this panel, flash by this one, give this one a beat, and then move on. It's like he's keyframing the action without even trying to do it. That's incredible considering that he didn't always have things planned out. And the kicker is that this man did almost all of this by himself. He had 2 assistants while working full-time, one when he was on Dr. Slump and one when he was on Dragon Ball and while he was doing his one-shots. He'd have them come in once or twice a week, and they'd handle filling in the black areas and maybe some of the background work. But for the most part, what you see on the page came from Toriyama's hand. That is absolutely incredible considering the amount of work this man was doing. The manga was great, but his illustrations are really where he shines. His vehicle design alone is worth studying. He'd come up with these crazy cars and trucks and planes, and they just visually work. And he put so much detail into them that you could actually see someone trying to build them. This probably comes from his product design background, and is just so good. He clearly had an eye and maybe even a passion for mechanical things. That attention to detail is another cool point. When he would make illustrations, he didn't always draw backgrounds, but when he did and put effort into them, they were just stunning. And again, it's not just a cool looking illustration, there's a story in the image. And then layered on top of this is his watercolor work. And again, one of those things where I went, I'm totally gonna steal that. Most of the time he would make it look similar to markers, but every now and again he would come in and just go to town. And you get these incredible illustrations that could easily be art prints by themselves. It's the one thing he changed about his style over time that I didn't like. I didn't mind him simplifying the line art and even making the characters a little skinnier than he had been drawing them in the past. However, he really got into digital coloring and the airbrush look, and I don't think it does his line art justice. His style looks way better as watercolor. I'm not sure why he never used a digital version of watercolors, since there are plenty of apps that can mimic real media very well. You get all the benefits of the digital space and the beauty of traditional media. Either way, the change to the coloring style didn't affect his compositions. He was still a master at it. I could spend the rest of my life studying Toriyama's work and still come nowhere near what that man could do. He was an inspiration to millions of artists, and that influence can be seen in so many people's work. And he didn't just inspire comic book artists and illustrators. He inspired musicians, directors, actors, and game designers. He brought joy to billions of people across the world, whether it was because they just wanted something to read or watch, or because Dr. Slump, Dragon Quest, or Dragon Ball was an escape from their situation. Toriyama's legacy is one that few people ever reach. Who other than Osamu Tezuka could claim to have impacted and influenced so many people? Toriyama may not have made as many works as Tezuka, but his influence can't be denied. Name a popular manga or anime that was created after the 1980s, and I challenge you to show how it doesn't lead back to Dr. Slump or Dragon Ball. Most of the things you could think of probably go back to Akira Toriyama in some way. That is his legacy. That is his importance, not just to manga, not just to Japan, but to the world. He influenced and inspired almost every form of entertainment you can think of. So many creative ideas and worlds only exist because of Toriyama. There would be no Naruto, no One Piece, no Shaman King, no Bleach, no Attack on Titan, no My Hero Academia, no One Punch Man, no Rurouni Kenshin, but for Akira Toriyama. Toriyama's legacy is the sheer impact of his stories, the themes, the tropes, and the lessons that he shared with billions of people. So many artists learn from Toriyama and use that inspiration to create their own works that will go on to inspire future generations. That's why they call him Sensei. And so, Sensei, while you will be missed, you will never be forgotten. Arigato, Toriyama Sensei.